If you skip this, you'll miss the best part. Because what one woman almost got away with in a house full of marble floors and crystal chandeliers is something that still keeps people up at night. A man who couldn't even lift his own arms to defend himself. A woman who smiled at cameras and planned murder in private. And one maid, the person everyone in that mansion looked right past, who saw the truth before anyone else did. Hey friends, welcome back. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city and country in the comments. I always love seeing how far this little corner of the internet reaches. Tonight's story is one about love that wasn't real, loyalty that nobody expected, and a truth that almost stayed buried forever. Stay with me till the end, this one will stick with you. Nobody in that house thought a Tuesday afternoon would change everything. Daniel Wells was 34 years old, and by every outward measure, he had won at life. He'd built Wells Technologies from a garage in Dayton, Ohio into a company worth billions. Magazines called him the boy from nowhere who built everything. He had the kind of smile that made boardrooms relax and the kind of mind that made competitors nervous. He was, by every account, a good man, the kind who still remembered the names of the security guards, who paid for his old high school's football uniforms every year without telling anyone, who never forgot where he came from. 2 years ago, he met Vanessa Cole at a charity gala in Manhattan. She was 30 years old, stunning in the effortless way that made people stop mid-sentence, and she laughed at his jokes like she meant it. She told him she didn't care about his money. She cared about him. Daniel, who had spent most of his adult life surrounded by people who wanted something from him, finally believed he'd found someone who didn't. He proposed 8 months later on a rooftop in Chicago, city lights spread out beneath them like scattered stars. Vanessa cried. Everyone said it was the happiest anyone had ever seen Daniel Wells. What almost nobody remembered, in all that excitement, was Maria Alvarez. Maria was 34 too, though she seemed older in the way people do when life has asked more of them than it should. She had worked for the Wells family for 10 years, ever since Daniel's mother had gotten sick and needed someone steady in the house. Maria had been that someone. She'd nursed his mother through her final months, stayed on after she passed, and somewhere along the way, she'd become something the household staff roster didn't have a word for, not quite family, but never just an employee either. She kept the house running. She remembered how Daniel liked his coffee. Black, no sugar, but only before 10 a.m., otherwise a splash of cream. She remembered his mother's birthday and lit a candle for her every year in the kitchen when no one was looking. She was, in every sense that mattered, the last living thread connecting Daniel to the boy he used to be before all the money. Vanessa had never liked her. Not loudly, Vanessa was too polished for loud, but in small ways. The way she'd hand Maria her coat without looking at her. The way she'd correct her in front of guests over things that didn't need correcting. Maria never said anything. It wasn't her place, and besides, Daniel was happy. That was what mattered. Then came the trip to Denver. Daniel had flown out for a board meeting, taking the company's small private plane, the same one he'd flown 100 times before. Routine. Ordinary. The kind of Tuesday nobody bothers to remember. Except this time, 30 minutes from landing, the plane hit turbulence that wasn't supposed to be there. Systems failed. The pilot fought the controls for what felt, to everyone aboard, like an eternity crammed into 90 seconds. When it was over, the plane had made an emergency landing in a field outside the city, torn apart at the wing, smoke rising into a grey Colorado sky. Daniel survived. The pilot survived. But something inside Daniel's spine did not survive the impact intact. He woke up 4 days later in a hospital bed in Denver, surrounded by the low hum of machines, with a doctor's voice explaining words he didn't want to understand. Spinal cord injury. T10 vertebra. Paralysis from the waist down. Permanent, most likely, though they'd know more with time. The first face he saw clearly, once the fog of medication lifted, was Vanessa's, holding his hand, mascara smudged from crying. "I'm not going anywhere," she told him. "I love you. This changes nothing." The second face, 3 days later, when Vanessa had gone back to New York to handle things, was Maria's, sitting quietly in the corner of the room with a book she wasn't really reading, because someone from home needed to be there, and she hadn't been able to stay away. Daniel didn't know it yet. But those two women, in that hospital room, represented two very different kinds of love. And only one of them was real. He came home in a wheelchair, and the house that had once felt like a trophy now felt like a cage with better lighting. The mansion in Connecticut had 31 rooms, and not one of them had been built with a wheelchair in mind. Contractors came within a week. Vanessa's doing, she made sure everyone knew, installing ramps, widening doorways, lowering counters in the kitchen. On paper, it looked like devotion. She posted photos of the renovation online with captions about standing by the ones we love, and the comments filled with hearts. But Daniel noticed things. Small things. The way Vanessa's smile in photographs never quite matched the tightness around her eyes when the cameras were gone. The way she'd started taking calls in the East Wing, door closed, voice dropping the moment he wheeled anywhere near. The way "I love you" had started sounding like a line from a script she'd read one too many times. He told himself it was the medication making him paranoid. Depression, the doctors said, was common after an injury like this. Trust your people. Rebuild slowly. Maria was the one who actually rebuilt his days. She learned how to help him transfer from the chair to the bed without either of them losing balance. She adjusted every routine in the house so he wouldn't have to ask for help with the small, humiliating things. Moved dishes to lower shelves, rearranged his study so he could reach every book without needing anyone. She never made him feel like a burden, not once, and she never made it look like charity either. She simply did what needed doing, the way she always had. One evening, about 6 weeks after he came home, Daniel wheeled himself to the kitchen for water and heard Vanessa's voice through the half-open door of the study, low and sharp. "I know what the prenup says now, David. I'm not stupid. The new will supersedes all of it once we're married. That's the whole point. That's why we're doing this." Daniel froze in the hallway. David was the name of his estate attorney. He told himself there could be 100 explanations. Marriage planning involved wills. That was normal, responsible even. He wheeled himself back to his study before she noticed him and sat there a long time, staring at nothing, trying to convince himself the cold feeling in his chest was nothing. That night, Maria brought him tea he hadn't asked for, the way she always did when something was clearly wrong and she wasn't going to pry. She set it down, and as she turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Mr. Wells," she said quietly. She'd called him Daniel exactly twice in 10 years, and always followed it immediately with an apology. "If something's troubling you, you don't have to carry it by yourself. You never have." He almost told her then. He almost said Vanessa's name and the word will in the same sentence and let someone else help him carry the weight of the suspicion that was starting to sit on his chest like a stone. He didn't. Not yet. But the mini cliffhanger inside him was already ticking, and it would not stay quiet much longer. This was the section where everything Daniel thought he understood about his own life started to come apart. It happened on a Thursday, 3 months after the crash. Daniel had a follow-up appointment with his physical therapist that Vanessa had, uncharacteristically, offered to cancel for him. She said he needed rest, said she'd handle the rescheduling. Daniel, exhausted from a bad night, agreed and stayed home. Which meant he was in the house, alone in his study with the door mostly closed, when Vanessa believed him to be 30 minutes away at a clinic. He heard her heels on the marble floor of the hallway, then her voice, and this time it wasn't lowered enough. "He can't even feel anything below his waist. David. He can't chase me, he can't fight, he can't even get out of a chair fast. This is the easiest it's ever going to be." A pause. "No, listen to me. Once we're married, the will's locked in. I get the estate, the company shares, all of it. You get your cut like we agreed. All we need is a wedding date and then, eventually, an accident. People have accidents all the time. Especially people who can't move." The tea Daniel had been holding slipped from his hand and hit the carpet, and he didn't even register the warm liquid soaking into the rug beneath his motionless legs. Vanessa's voice went silent on the other side of the wall. He heard her heels change direction, coming toward the study door, and in the seconds before she pushed it open, Daniel did something he would later understand had probably saved his life. He picked up a folder from his desk, opened it in his lap, and forced his face into the blank stillness of a man who had heard nothing at all. "Oh, I thought you were resting," Vanessa said, stepping into the doorway, her smile already back in place like a mask clicking shut. "Just going over some contracts," Daniel said, and his voice came out steadier than he had any right to expect. "Boring stuff. How was your call?" "Fine. Just wedding vendors." She smiled wider. "I was thinking we should set a date soon. I don't want to wait forever, Daniel. Life's too short." He looked at the woman he had once believed loved him more than his own fortune, and understood, in the space of one breath, that she had just told him, almost to his face, that she intended to marry him and then arrange his death. He smiled back at her. "You're right," he said. "Life's too short. Let's not wait." It was the first lie he had ever told her, and it would not be the last. Because Daniel Wells had just realized something that would define every choice he made from that point forward. If Vanessa believed she'd won, she would move slowly, carelessly, confidently. And a woman who believed she'd already won was a woman who could be caught. He needed proof. He needed time. And, though he didn't fully admit it to himself yet, he needed someone he could actually trust in a house that suddenly felt like enemy territory disguised as home. That night, long after Vanessa had gone to bed in the guest wing she'd claimed since the accident, "So you can rest properly," she'd said, though now every word from her mouth sounded different in his ears. Daniel wheeled himself quietly to the kitchen. Maria was still there, wiping down the counters, humming something low under her breath the way she did when she thought no one was listening. She startled when she saw him. "Mr. Wells, it's past midnight, you should." "Maria." His voice cracked in a way he hadn't intended. "Can you sit down for a minute?" She sat today. And for the first time in 10 years of working in that house, Daniel Wells told an employee something he hadn't told anyone else alive. What he'd heard through the study door, word for word, as close as he could remember it. Maria's face didn't move much as he spoke. She had the kind of stillness that came from a lifetime of holding her reactions close, but her hands, folded on the kitchen table, tightened until the knuckles went pale. "I wondered," she finally said. "I didn't want to believe it, but I wondered." "What do you mean?" 3 weeks ago I found a pill bottle in her bathroom that wasn't yours or hers. Sleep medication, prescription strength, under a name I didn't recognize. I told myself it was nothing. A friend's, maybe." Maria shook her head slowly. "And last week, I found your blood pressure medication rearranged in the cabinet. Moved, like someone had been looking through it. I told myself I was imagining things. That I was being paranoid because I never liked her." Daniel felt something settle in his chest, heavy and cold. "You should have told me." "Sir, with respect, how does a housekeeper tell a man his fiancée might be planning to hurt him, without proof, without anything but a feeling? You would have thought I was jealous, or crazy, or trying to come between you." Maria met his eyes for the first time since sitting down. "I've watched this family for 10 years. I buried your mother's ashes into her favorite flower bed with my own hands because you couldn't kneel down yet after the surgery on your knee, years before any of this. I'm not going to lie to you now. But I needed more than a feeling to say something this big." Daniel sat with that for a long moment. Outside, wind moved through the trees along the property line, and somewhere upstairs, the woman he'd once planned to marry was sleeping soundly, unaware that the ground beneath her plan had just started shifting. "Then we get proof," Daniel said quietly. "Together. And Maria, no one else in this house can know. Not the other staff, not my lawyer, not anyone, until we're certain." Maria nodded once, slow and solemn, like someone accepting a responsibility far heavier than her paycheck required. "I'm not doing this for money, Mr. Wells," she said. "I'm doing this because your mother would want someone in this house to protect you, and I intend to be that person." Neither of them slept much that night. And from that point on, the house that Vanessa believed she was quietly conquering had two people inside it who were no longer looking away. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Daniel's life, not because anything dramatic happened, but because everything ordinary suddenly felt like theater. He let Vanessa plan the wedding. He smiled at fabric swatches for the reception tent and nodded along to venue suggestions, all while a small hidden voice recorder, purchased quietly online under Maria's name, delivered to Maria's sister's address 2 towns over just to be safe, sat charging in his desk drawer each night, waiting. Maria began keeping a private log. Dates. Times. Small details. The name David mentioned twice more on phone calls she happened to overhear while cleaning nearby rooms, always at a careful distance, never eavesdropping so obviously that it would raise suspicion. She wrote down the pill bottle's prescription details before Vanessa noticed it missing and quietly returned it to its exact original position. Daniel's older brother, Thomas, flew in from Seattle for a visit during this stretch, and over dinner one night, Vanessa conveniently absent at a spa retreat upstate. Thomas leaned across the table and said the thing Daniel had been too afraid to say out loud himself. "I never trusted her, Danny. Not once. Something about the way she looks at you when she thinks no one's watching, like she's doing math." Thomas shook his head. "I didn't say anything before because you were happy, and God knows you deserve to be happy after everything with the accident. But I'm saying it now." Daniel almost told him everything. He almost broke the promise of secrecy he and Maria had made. But something in him, caution, maybe, or the simple exhausted instinct of a man who'd already been betrayed once and couldn't bear the thought of a mistake unraveling the proof before it was solid, held him back. "Just trust me a little longer," Daniel said instead. "I'm handling something." Thomas studied his brother's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay. But if you need me, you call. Any hour. I mean that." Meanwhile, Vanessa's confidence grew unchecked. She set the wedding date for 6 weeks out, small ceremony, she said, intimate, though Daniel now understood the real reason. The sooner the marriage happened, the sooner the new will would lock into place, and the sooner the clock on his life would start quietly counting down. She grew careless in the way overconfident people always do. She left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter one morning while showering, and Maria, heart pounding, fully aware of the risk, glanced at the lock screen notification that flashed across it. A text from a contact saved simply as D. After the wedding, not before. Too many eyes right now. Maria didn't touch the phone. She didn't need to. She simply memorized the words, walked to Daniel's study, and repeated them to him exactly as she'd read them. Daniel sat very still in his wheelchair, hands folded in his lap, staring at a spot on the wall. "After the wedding," he repeated softly. "Not before." The countdown had a name now, and a date. 6 weeks. And somewhere deep in that mansion, a woman was already imagining herself in black, standing over a grave, inheriting everything, while the man she was about to marry sat 2 rooms away, quietly building the case that would end her plan for good. To understand why Daniel had fallen so completely for Vanessa in the first place, you have to understand what his life looked like before she walked into it. He grew up the only son of a single mother in a 2-bedroom rental outside Dayton, a woman who worked double shifts at a diner and still found the energy to help him with math homework at 11 at night. His father had left before Daniel turned 4, and the word father in their house had simply stopped being used. The way you stop using a word for something that no longer applies to your life. Daniel built his first piece of software at 16, in a bedroom with a leaking ceiling, using a computer his mother had put on layaway for 8 months to afford. By 26, that software had become the backbone of a company worth more than the GDP of some small countries. By 30, his mother had passed from cancer, and Daniel had more money than he knew what to do with and no one, really, to share any of it with. Success, it turned out, was a strange kind of loneliness, one where everyone wanted something from you, and it became impossible to tell affection from appetite. Vanessa had seemed different. She'd talked about books, not brands. She'd cried at his mother's old photographs when he showed them to her, said his mother reminded her of her own grandmother. She'd made him laugh in a way that felt unguarded, unrehearsed. He had believed, with the same certainty he'd once believed in his own code, that he had finally found someone real. Maria, by contrast, had never once tried to seem like anything other than what she was. She'd grown up in Hartford, raised by her grandmother after her own mother passed young, and had spent her 20s working 3 jobs to put herself through night classes in nursing before family responsibilities pulled her away from finishing the degree. She'd taken the position with the Wells family not out of some grand plan, but because Daniel's mother had needed steady, gentle care in her final year, and Maria had simply been good at giving it. In the 10 years since, Maria had never asked Daniel for anything beyond her wages. She'd turned down a raise once, telling him, almost embarrassed, that she didn't feel right accepting more when she hadn't done anything differently to earn it. Daniel had thought about that conversation more times over the years than he probably should have. Now, sitting in his study late one night while Maria organized files across the desk from him, files that would soon become evidence, Daniel found himself asking a question he hadn't planned to ask. Why did you stay? All these years. You could have found easier work, better pay, somewhere without all this. He gestured vaguely at the mansion around them. Complication. Maria considered the question seriously, the way she considered most things. Because your mother asked me to look after you, near the end. She said you'd build the whole world around you and forget to build anyone into it. She was worried you'd end up surrounded by people and still be alone. Maria looked at him steadily. I told her I'd make sure that didn't happen. I meant it then. I still mean it now. Daniel had no answer for that. He simply sat there, in a wheelchair he never asked for, in a house full of people who wanted his money, realizing that the one person who had never wanted anything from him was the one person he had almost overlooked entirely. The night everything came to a head began like any other. It was 11 days before the wedding. Vanessa had grown visibly restless, sharper with the staff, distracted during dinner, checking her phone with a frequency that suggested the plan she and David had built was entering its final, most dangerous stage. Daniel had noticed the change and told Maria to be careful, to stay alert, though neither of them could have predicted exactly how soon the danger would arrive. Daniel had gone to bed early that night, exhausted from a full day of physical therapy that had pushed his body past its limits. Maria was doing her final walkthrough of the ground floor before heading home for the night, checking locks, turning off lights, the same routine she'd followed for 10 years. She heard it almost by accident, a sound from Daniel's bedroom that didn't belong there. Not the television. Not the usual creak of the wheelchair being moved. A muffled, struggling sound, brief and choked, like someone trying to breathe through something that wouldn't let them. Maria didn't think. She moved. She reached the bedroom door and pushed it open to find Vanessa leaning over Daniel's bed, a pillow pressed hard against his face, both her hands white-knuckled with effort, Daniel's own hands weakly clawing at her wrists, arms that still worked even though his legs did not, arms that were losing strength with every second the pillow stayed pressed down. Get off him. Maria's voice tore through the room louder than she'd ever heard herself speak in that house. She crossed the distance in 3 strides and grabbed Vanessa by the shoulder, wrenching her backward with a strength that surprised even herself. Vanessa spun around, breathing hard, the mask completely gone from her face for the first time in 2 years, replaced by something cold and furious. This isn't what it looks like, she said, too fast, too high-pitched to be believed. Daniel gasped air back into his lungs, coughing, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with a fear that Maria would remember for the rest of her life. It's exactly what it looks like, Maria said, her voice shaking now that the danger had passed, adrenaline crashing through her all at once. I heard everything, Vanessa. Weeks of it. The calls. David. The will. All of it. Vanessa's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Panic, calculation, and finally, a kind of venomous resignation. You have no proof, she hissed. I have recordings, Daniel said, his voice raw but steady, as he pulled himself upright against the headboard, putting distance between himself and the woman he'd once planned to marry. Weeks of them. And now I have this. You just tried to kill me in front of a witness. For one frozen moment, nobody in that room moved. Then Vanessa lunged for the door, heels skidding on the hardwood, and Maria, without a second thought for her own safety, grabbed the bedroom phone off the nightstand and dialed 911 with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, blocking the doorway with her own body until the operator picked up. "I need police at this address immediately," Maria said, her voice finding its footing even as her heart pounded against her ribs. "Attempted murder. The suspect is still on the property." Vanessa didn't get far. She made it to the top of the grand staircase before two responding officers, alerted by the property's private security who'd also caught the disturbance, met her at the bottom. Upstairs, in a bedroom that still smelled faintly of the perfume Vanessa always wore, Daniel Wells sat gripping the hand of a woman who had never asked him for anything and understood, with total clarity, exactly who had saved his life. The days after felt like watching a slow-motion collapse of everything Daniel had believed about his own future. Vanessa was arrested that night on charges of attempted murder, and within 72 hours, investigators had connected the dots to David Ferro, the estate attorney who had been quietly rewriting inheritance documents behind the backs of everyone involved. It turned out the two had been romantically involved for over a year, since well before Daniel's accident, according to phone records the police obtained, and the plane malfunction that had left Daniel paralyzed, while ultimately ruled a genuine mechanical failure with no evidence of tampering, had apparently given the pair an idea they simply hadn't been able to resist acting on afterward. The recordings from Daniel's hidden device, combined with Maria's careful, patient documentation, dates, times, the pill bottle details, the phone message she'd memorized, became the backbone of the prosecution's case. Maria was asked to give a formal statement, then another, then finally testimony, and through all of it she remained exactly as steady as she'd always been, answering every question plainly, without embellishment, without seeking credit for anything. "I didn't do anything special," she told the detective handling the case, when he remarked on how composed she'd stayed under pressure. "I just refused to look away from something I already suspected was true." The media, of course, made her into something more than that. Local news picked up the story first, then national outlets. "Housekeeper saves paralyzed billionaire from fiancé's murder plot" ran across headlines for nearly a week. Reporters camped outside the gates of the estate. Maria, uncomfortable with the sudden attention, kept declining interviews, insisting the story wasn't about her. Daniel disagreed. Publicly, and often. "She's the only reason I'm alive to give this statement," he told one reporter who'd managed to get 5 minutes with him outside the courthouse after Vanessa's arraignment, Daniel's wheelchair steady beside Maria, who stood a respectful step behind him out of old habit, still uncomfortable being seen as anything other than staff. "Everyone in my life who was supposed to protect me either didn't notice or didn't act. She did both." Thomas flew back in the moment he heard the news, gripping his brother in a hug so tight Daniel nearly toppled sideways in his chair, both of them laughing and crying at the same time in a hospital hallway where Daniel had gone for a precautionary checkup after the incident. "I told you," Thomas said into his brother's shoulder. "I told you something was wrong with her." "You did," Daniel admitted. "I just wasn't ready to hear it from the right person yet." It would take months for the legal case to fully unfold. Vanessa would eventually plead to a reduced charge in exchange for testimony against David, whose role in engineering the entire scheme carried the heavier sentence. But for Daniel, the legal outcome almost felt secondary to something else entirely. The slow, dawning realization of exactly how close he had come to losing everything, and exactly who had stood between him and that loss. Recovery, it turned out, meant more than physical therapy. Daniel spent the months following the arrest relearning how to trust his own instincts, how to separate genuine affection from performance, how to sit in a room with someone and simply believe what they told him without a small cold voice in the back of his mind waiting for the betrayal. It wasn't easy. Some nights he woke gasping, the memory of the pillow pressing down replaying against his will, and it was Maria, still working in the house, still the steady presence she'd always been, who would knock quietly and sit with him until the panic passed, never making a production of it, never treating him like something fragile. Somewhere in those months, without either of them fully naming it, the relationship between them shifted. It started small. Daniel began asking her opinion on things beyond the household, business decisions, the restructuring of a charitable foundation he wanted to build in his mother's name, even something as simple as which paint color might make the newly renovated ground floor feel less like a hospital retrofit and more like a home again. Maria, initially hesitant to overstep, found herself gradually speaking more freely, offering opinions Daniel genuinely wanted to hear. He learned things about her he'd somehow never asked in 10 years, that she'd once dreamed of finishing her nursing degree, that she had a daughter, 19 now, studying education at a state college 2 hours away, that Maria drove up every other weekend without fail no matter how tired she was, because she'd promised her own late grandmother that the cycle of hard lives passed down without support would stop with her. "You could finish that degree now, you know," Daniel told her one afternoon, watching her water the plants along the sunroom windows, a task she'd taken over herself after his mother passed and never quite given up. "I could help. Tuition, whatever you need." Maria set down the watering can and looked at him for a long moment. "I appreciate that. I do. But I don't want anything to feel like it's owed, Mr. Wells. I didn't do what I did for a reward." "I know," Daniel said quietly. "That's exactly why I want to help. Not because you're owed it. Because you deserve it, and because for the first time in years, I actually trust the reason I'm offering." She didn't answer right away. But 3 weeks later, Maria enrolled in an accelerated nursing program, tuition quietly covered by a scholarship fund Daniel established, anonymously, at her insistence, so no one at the hospital where she'd eventually work would treat her differently for it. Daniel, meanwhile, began walking again, not fully, not the way he once had, but with the aid of new therapy and a determination that surprised even his doctors. He regained partial mobility in his legs over the following year, enough to stand, to take slow, careful steps with support. It wasn't the life he'd had before the crash. But it was, in its own way, a second one worth having. A year and a half after the night Maria burst through that bedroom door, Daniel Wells stood, leaning lightly on a cane, something his doctors had once told him might never be possible again. In the same sunroom where Maria used to water the plants, holding a small velvet box he'd been carrying in his jacket pocket for 3 nervous weeks. Their relationship had grown slowly, carefully, the way real things tend to grow when two people have already survived betrayal and know exactly what they don't want to repeat. There had been no rush, no grand declarations pulled from a movie script. Just steady presence, honest conversation, and the quiet accumulation of trust neither of them had ever expected to feel again. "I know this isn't how things are supposed to go," Daniel said, his voice unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with his legs. "You worked for my family for 10 years. You saved my life. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I fell in love with the person who was never trying to be anything other than exactly who she was." Maria, hand pressed to her mouth, said nothing, tears already falling. "I'm not asking because I need someone to take care of me," Daniel continued. "I'm asking because I finally understand what real love looks like, and it looks like you. It always has. I just needed almost losing everything to see it clearly." She said yes before he'd even finished opening the box. They married the following spring, a small ceremony in the same sunroom, Thomas standing as best man, Maria's daughter as her mother's only bridesmaid, sunlight pouring through windows that had once framed a very different kind of loneliness and now framed something entirely new. Vanessa, by then, was 3 years into a lengthy prison sentence upstate. David Ferro had received a longer one still. Daniel never spoke of either of them with anger anymore, only with a kind of tired gratitude that the truth had come out in time and that the person who'd uncovered it had never once asked for anything in return. The moral of this story isn't complicated, even though the events of it certainly were. It's this: the people who love you the most are rarely the loudest about it. Sometimes they're the ones quietly refilling your water glass, remembering how you take your coffee, staying up late to make sure the house is locked before they go home. Never asking for credit, never expecting anything back. Real loyalty doesn't announce itself. It simply shows up, again and again, especially when it matters most. If this story moved you tonight, I hope you'll consider hitting that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need a story like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we've got so many more true-to-life stories coming your way. And if someone in your life came to mind while you were watching this, someone quiet, someone steady, someone who's been showing up for you without ever asking for thanks, maybe send them this story tonight. Sometimes the people who deserve to hear "I see you" the most are the ones who never ask to be seen at all. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.